Hey guys.
How you doing?
So earlier this week we focused on chapter 3 with Have You Developed the Habit of Happiness?
'Cause I'm happy.
And yes, very happy. But hope that y'all got some time to sit with your spouse and look at these and just figure out some things that make y'all happy and how to make just your marriage work.
Yeah.
But tonight we're going to talk a little bit more about the saboteurs of a happy marriage and just look at self-pity, blame, and resentment, which they share in the book.
Absolutely. And so these are, self-pity, blame, and resentment are different ways of expression, really the needs that we have within us. And so there are times where the very needs that we have can be expressed, but they can be expressed illegitimately instead of legitimately. We all have a desire of being defended, being comforted, being desired, and on, right? But again, if those areas haven't been communicated with your spouse, haven't been had the opportunity of healed, then when situations arise, I can respond in self-pity. I can respond in deflecting with blame, or I can respond by creating disconnection, by holding on to resentment for whatever reason. And as a result, we can see why they are the saboteurs of a happy marriage is because it doesn't allow you and your spouse to embrace one another physically, emotionally, spiritually, because there's disconnection, whether through self-pity, blame, or resentment.
Well, in self-pity, it definitely can happen to either spouse.
Yeah.
And might happen at the same time, different times. But if you see your spouse going into this state of self-pity, it can really affect the whole family,
Sure.
friends, just the outlook of life. And it's all dependent on life circumstances. And it's easy to get caught up and to find yourself just thinking, poor, pitiful me, and frustrated, and just everything seems to build. Maybe like everyone's out to get you, everything's out to get you. And it's an experience. An experience that no happy marriage can afford, because it is poisonous, just like all three of these are poisonous to a marriage.
Sure. And it can even be an experience or something that's happened where there can be legitimacy in you being wronged, right? And so that takes away the opportunity of ownership, of getting to choose whether or not you wanted that to be said to you, to be done with you. But where's choice in that? Well, we have the opportunity of choosing how we respond. And I think that that's the big kicker. Not to be insensitive or invalidating, because there are things that we need to walk through and process, and some more intense, some less intense. But again, how do we choose to respond as a result? And I think that that's the big thing within self-pity, is that sometimes it can be situations where it's hard to see the legitimacy and why it is that we're being we are being pitiful and deriving from a self-pity perspective, and other times where anybody in the right mind would say, yes, I can see why you had that perspective. But again, how do we choose to respond, whether that's immediately or that's in a set amount of time after being able to process? And so next they talk about blame.
Yeah, well, and blame, it really goes back to right after creation with Adam and Eve.
Sure.
And the serpent, and, Eve's blaming the serpent, Adam's blaming Eve. So it's the finger of he said, she said.
Right.
And it's people can find themselves making excuses
Sure.
in this blaming and pushing off, well, hey, it was their responsibility to take care of that. So,
I'm off the hook, right?
Yeah. So
Sure.
blame them. And just all of this leads to unhappiness in a marriage.
Yeah, because there's got to be ownership, right? Who owns what? And I think as a couple, hopefully where we're trying to get to and add some stability is that ownership belongs to both of us, right? Now I have my part, she has her part, but collectively as one, we both own it collectively together. And so if no one owns anything, then how can resolve really take place to be able to move forward? And then finally, they talk about resentment. And it says, no one is exempt from being treated unfairly. And so just like we talked about with self-pity. And so when that does happen, what do we choose to do and how do we respond in those moments when we are being treated unfairly? Not to say that what they're doing is right, but again, how do we choose to respond? Because when we choose to resent, it's us taking something and seeing it through that lens or hearing through that filter. And every time that we see that individual or hear through that filter them speak, it could possibly cause us to disconnect even to a greater degree. And before you know it, there is tremendous distance between you and your spouse. Well, if the potential of health is by creating not further distance, but closer within proximity for embrace, for communication, for interaction, for maybe a little purple, whatever that looks like, then distance is the last thing that you want. Within certain circumstances, of course, right? But what we're really talking about is for these specific is how does resentment impact the marriage? Well, it causes disconnection, and disconnection, just as you know, in anything, it causes issues. And so the greatest thing that we can do is making sure that we are connected with one another.
And like the book states, it says resentment is like a cancer where it starts out small and then it slowly spreads and continues throughout the body, and it will continue throughout your marriage and suffocate it.
Sure. And Dr. John Gottman, in his research, which the book the authors utilize quite often, he's come to understand through his research the vast majority of issues, and I think that we've even communicated this, the vast majority of issues within marriage never actually get resolved. And so if resentment is present, then that's my very filter, that's my very lens that I see and hear through. We can see why potentially that's the reason why the vast majority of issues within marriage never come to a resolve. And so to shift gears a little bit, now that we've talked about some of the saboteurs, we're going to talk about, can couples really live happily ever after?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, they ride off into the sunset on that white stallion, of course, right?
But when you go into marriage, you feel like you know everything about that person and that you're meant for each other. God created y'all just for each other. But then you do get married, you start living with each other, and you start seeing all those differences, and from your upbringing, just personalities, little quirks that each other have, and it makes you question that happily ever after.
Mm-hmm. And so even like the book talks about marriages can never be perfect because people are not perfect. You know, every bride and groom, they had their faults. You know, they have their great attributes and personality, but we all have our quirks. And so sometimes those quirks can be cute, right, when you are dating or courting or whatever that looks like. But then all of a sudden, do those quirks ever start kind of getting on your nerves?
It's
potentially,
like sandpaper.
yeah, like the very thing that I thought was cute potentially isn't cute anymore. I don't know. But again, what is that?
Not that we've had any of those in our marriage.
Okay, moving right along. But just as it says, we are all at times gloomy, cranky, selfish, or unreasonable. And so because of that, what does perfect look like? Don't know. So what does perfect look like? And so there is no perfect marriage, but I understand that Bryn is perfect for me. And because of that, I know that she has my best heart in mind and my best interest in mind. And so does that mean that everything that she says is going to settle well with me? Well, no, because again, I'm still walking out my own process of transformation. And as a result of that, there's going to be some times where I hear and I'm thinking, she's right. I do need to take that to heart. I was, illogical, or that was ridiculous how I responded or thought or whatnot. Well, there's going to be other times where it just kind of catches me off guard, or maybe it digs at me where really that wasn't her heart, but I still think that that's a dig. And so I'm a little agitated or irritated because of that. And because of that, maybe my expression or my tone of voice or what I communicate back to her really doesn't help and throws gasoline on the fire. And now as a result of that, the very thing that she meant for good for me, I've responded in harm. Now she potentially could respond back to me. Again, how do we respond in the moments when our spouses are communicating something or does something that can cause potential friction?
Mm-hmm. And like the book mentions, living happily ever after only works when you make it work.
That's great.
Because it is work. And just like we've talked multiple times, love is a choice. It's an every day you're going to wake up and you have to make the choice. When you have a spouse who might be wallowing in that self-pity or blaming you for something, you're going to have to be mindful about the decisions you make and how you respond. And you can either help feed that fire or take the low road and, just be as strong as you can for the betterment of your marriage. Sure. And to try to bring that happiness back in.
Yeah. And so another statement that they say is, so how can a couple live happily ever after? Not by depending on externals. And so again, I think that we have the opportunity and I think we talked a little bit about this last time, about our environments. If our environments are different, then as a result of that, that can allow this sanctity to be different as a result. But again, I'm always looking at a hypothetical. Not to say it can't happen, but again, what if it doesn't? Now, as a result, I'm holding on to something that's not really concrete. I love what Dr. Alexander Lloyd says. He says, if I gave you a magic genie lamp and you can only have one wish, and your only wish can't be to violate anybody's will, what would you ask for? And he says that a lot of people actually ask for something external, and like $1 million or something of that nature. And he says, okay, great. So his follow-up question is, what would you do with that? And they said, a lot of times, just using the illustration from his book, I'd probably pay off all my debt. And he says, man, that's awesome. That's fantastic. So winning $1 million, paying off your debt. So what would that give you as a result? And in the illustration, he utilized individuals saying, oh, it'd give me peace. Did you catch it? For people that didn't, he would utilize this. So you need $1 million, to get peace? And people would finally get it. The very thing that people seek out after, these externals, are to really derive to give us the very internal virtues that we seek out after more than anything. And again, that is so true within our marriages as well. And the relationships that we have, we think that all these other externals are going to be able to give us some things that we dream and hope for. So it allows the internals to be at peace and settled with ourselves, so that it allows the interaction that we have with our spouse to be completely different.
And just something else, like so much of it just is in our mind.
Sure.
So, the enemy is going to come and try to get you to think of those negative thoughts and point out all the wrong or rough edges of your spouse and just try to beat you down and to get you to beat your spouse down.
Yeah.
And so just those negative thoughts, it's like the book says, the habit of happiness is an inside job. So you have to start in your mind and making that conscious decision that you're not going to let anything come between you, and that you're going to communicate and work through it and choose that happiness, no matter what it takes or how long it takes to get there.
Sure. And so, have you developed the habit of happiness? What does that look like? So now that we've kind of shared the question 3 for this week, what is their challenge as they continue to move forward?
What's your challenge, guys? Okay, well, mainly just to work on being happy. Like, what are there tools that you can use?
Sure.
Are there situations currently in your life you can look at and really work through them together?
Sure. And I think being aware of your emotions aren't bad. They're just indicators, right? Indicating where I am and where I want to be and maybe where I'm not. And so, again, being aware of those can allow us to determine what it is I need to communicate. Because if I'm having a bad day and I'm a little angry, then I need to communicate that with Bryn that guess what, that I may not be able to go into the specifics, but I can at least give her enough of the external puzzle so that she can understand where I am right now. And so maybe this isn't the best time. And as a result of that, just to give me some time to process this so that I can come back and talk with her overall. So again, how do we continue to develop the habit of happiness? One is that conscious decision and choice that I'm going to create that habit, knowing that habits get formed within 21 days, according to research. And because of that, then I'm going to continue to work and look at the things that possibly are triggers that can cause me not to be happy. What are those? And so I think part of that is to be vulnerable with yourself, to be able to communicate that. And if you're not aware of what that is, then whether that's in a journal, whether that's talking with your spouse, asking them, so what areas do you see me possibly being vulnerable to a lack of happiness? What are some of those situations? Well, typically we know that stress, tension, pressure, even the responsibilities, fatigue, getting tired, those type of things can have an opportunity of wearing on our happiness because, again, we can respond illegitimately as a result of being tired. And so, again, how do we create this habit? By being vulnerable, by communicating with your spouse. And so, yeah.
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 Okay.
Y'all have a great night.
What's y'all's overall goal, though?
Habit of happiness.
Habit of happiness. Y'all have a great week.